Carter. Jimmy Carter believed that the U.S. government should embody basic morality and human rights in all actions. In 1977, Congress declared that any country that the U.S. provides assistance for must provide information proving that they adhere to basic human rights. So that's a good thing, right? The Iran hostage crisis occurred under Carter, and it lasted 444 days. Here's the background before we get into it. Iran was in violation of many human rights. For instance, there were 25,000 to 100,000 political prisoners, but the U.S. still assisted them. In 1953, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was put in power by the U.S. And CIA, and he was good to the U.S. He let us set up listening stations in the northwest portions of Iran to listen to the Soviet Union. And in the 1970s, when there was an oil embargo in the Middle East on the U.S., Iran still sold oil to the U.S. In December of 1977, Nixon told the Iranian public how great and well-loved the Shah was. But in reality, only the rich loved him, and the masses hated the Shah. So this increased protests against the Shah. Ayatollah Ruholla Khomeini, I'm sorry for butchering that, was a protest leader against Iran and the U.S. An Ayatollah is a religious leader, so that's part of his title. In January of 1979, the protests got so bad that the Shah fled, and Khomeini became Iran's leader. He called the U.S. the Great Satan and behind the Shah. So basically, the Shah was the U.S. puppet, and the U.S. is evil. Not very good. Carter allowed the Shah into the U.S. for medicine, and Khomeini demanded that the Shah be returned to Iran and tried. Carter refused. And so, on November 4th of 1979, Khomeini's supporters stormed to the U.S. Embassy in Iran's capital and took control. And in the first few weeks, 13 of the 66 hostages were released, and the rest were held for 444 days. Khomeini had two demands, and then he would release the hostages. 1, return the Shah, and 2, admit guilt of supporting the Shah. Carter tried to storm the embassy as well as negotiate with Khomeini, and he failed. Khomeini was like, no, meet my demands, or else. So, the hostages were released the instant that Reagan was inaugurated, which looked good for Reagan and killed Carter politically. So that's why they were held for 444 days. It wasn't just that Khomeini had some weird obsession with the number 4. He was waiting for Carter to be out of office. In 1978, Carter returned rights to Panama, to the Panamanians, so now they were in control of the Panama Canal. In 1999, they actually had full control of Panama. In 1979, there were the Camp David Accords. Israel occupied territories in the Middle East in what was part of Egypt, and Carter invited Anwar El-Sadat, who was the leader in Egypt, and Menachem of Israel, to meet at Camp David to negotiate for peace, which was revolutionary. But the peace didn't last. Camp David is a retreat in Maryland for the presidents, so that's why it's called the Camp David Accords. They didn't really get along very well, but they did negotiate for peace, but it didn't last. The U.S. began to support a liberation movement in Afghanistan, which was between Osama bin Laden and the Soviet Union, and the U.S. supported Osama bin Laden. In 1980, the U.S. boycotted the Olympics in Moscow.